Hello everyone, welcome to Retro Gaming Online. I'm Brad, and today I'm going to share with you my top 10 Nintendo Entertainment System games. And just to be clear, this is my top 10 list. This isn't the top 10 games on the system. These are the top 10 games for me. A lot of this has to do with games that I owned as a kid, games that my friends owned as a kid, and games that I rented as a kid. So there's a lot of nostalgia in this list. There's so many games that I can't give you the top 10. So many of them that I had never played or still haven't played to this day. So what I'll do, I'll give you the 10 games that are closest to me and the memories that I have with the Nintendo Entertainment System. So if I haven't played it, it's not on this list. The thing that I like about the NES and talking to people about the NES is that everybody has a story about their games. It's not necessarily just, oh, that's a good game or that's a bad game. Everybody has a story, where they played it, who they played it with, how they got the game, whether they rented it or bought it or got it for Christmas one day. It's all about the story behind the nostalgia. Before we get started, be sure to click the subscribe button. Also, give us a like and comment down below your top 10 NES games. Let's see how many of them match. I'm sure a few of them will. Number 10 is Gauntlet. Gauntlet is probably one of the first Nintendo Entertainment System games that I ever played. My dad used to go over to a family friend's house to play Dungeons and Dragons like once a week or a couple of times a month, and they had Gauntlet there, and we would play that forever. Little did I know, I ended up finding out later that it was in the arcade as well. So as soon as I saw it in the arcade, I knew I had to give that a try. Dumped a ton of quarters in there, but I always came back to the NES version. I would rent it all the time. I always thought it was so cool. At the time I didn't know what it meant, but that the cartridges were black and oddly shaped. It always kind of stood out to me, and I've always been into fantasy games. So the ability to go through all those dungeons, I never did really good at it, but I still loved it. Game number 9 on my top 10 NES games is Baseball Stars. Now you might say, a sports game? What the heck is that? Well, basically, this game was the first game that I found that you were able to create or modify the names of every player on the team. I think it was every player in the league you could actually change the names for. I would sit there for hours and I'd create a team full of my friends and family. My brother ended up deleting the whole save file, so I had to go ahead and remake them all, but I spent hours putting my friends, their names, their numbers, and then just playing the game with all my friends like we used to do at the park, or since I grew up in Baltimore, in the alley. But Baseball Stars, one of my favorite sports titles to this day. The next game is Pro Wrestling. Now, I know it's one of the original games that came out for the system, Black Box Classic, but it's probably the best wrestling game that came out on the NES. It played well. The characters oddly resembled wrestlers in real life at that time, and it's a game that I actually owned. I would sit there and play that game forever, especially after I played WrestleMania for the NES, and that game, the fact that it was so bad made me appreciate pro wrestling so much more. Game number 7 is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. Now, this game I played in the arcade a lot. A friend of mine, his grandmother used to take us to the arcade every Sunday. We'd go in there with rolls full of quarters, and we'd dump it into Ninja Turtles, The Simpsons. I always loved flight simulator games. He was normally over by Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. I was terrible at those games, so I never played them. But Ninja Turtles was one of the games I loved to play. And when it came to the Nintendo, it was good. Like I was shocked at how well it replicated the arcade experience. Now, obviously the graphics weren't as good, but it felt like I was playing the arcade game in the living room of my cousin's house. I didn't actually own the game, but every day after school, I would go to my cousin's house, and we would just play and play and play. And you start to learn all the tricks to the different bosses. It's a really great game. It has a ton of memories for me. Game number 6 is Dragon Warrior. Now, Dragon Warrior is the game that started my love for RPGs. RPGs are my favorite genre of games. Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy X, Chrono Trigger. All these games all started with Dragon Warrior. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I was super good at Dragon Warrior because I was pretty young, and I wasn't like advancing in Dragon Warrior, and it was super frustrating at the time. But what it did, it piqued my interest in the genre. I knew that there was something there that just drew me to it. So I went and then played Final Fantasy, and Final Fantasy was a little easier for me. Once I got comfortable with Final Fantasy, I ended up going back and playing Dragon Warrior, and I had a much better experience with it. But I definitely credit Dragon Warrior as the first game that started the love of RPGs. Game number 5, Tecmo Super Bowl. I remember going over to my buddy's house, and we would play this game all day and all night. He always picked the Washington Redskins. I always picked the San Francisco 49ers, and we would play for hours. And this was still one of the first games that I remember playing it was officially licensed. It had all the players, well, most of the players. Some of the guys were named player because I guess they didn't have the license for that individual player, but they had, not only did they have all the players, they had all the teams. And it just felt so real. Trying to pick the play that your partner ran so that you could rush in there and sack the quarterback. I mean, there's no better feeling than seeing your entire defensive line go through and crush your opponent in the backfield. Game number 4 is Rampage. I first played this in the arcade, and I loved it. It was just fun. It wasn't too hard. It didn't seem like a coin, just an arcade game that was designed just to eat all your quarters. You could sit there and play and play and play, and there's something about just being a giant monster that destroys buildings that really gets me going. It's really just a fun game. And then when it came out on the NES, I knew I had to have it, so I went and got it, played it. And it was another thing that was really cool about the game is you traveled from city to city to city across the United States. And I always thought it was fun to get to Baltimore, which is where I'm from, and destroy all of the cities in the town that I live and drive through every single day. It's just a fun game. I mean, you can't really say a ton more than that. Game number 3, Contra. Contra's pretty much on everybody's top 10 list. I know it's no surprise to anyone that it's on there. But the thing I loved about Contra was it was easy to learn, but it was incredibly hard to master. And most of us had to use the Contra code in order to get, or the Konami code as most people call it. We called it the Contra code. It was easy enough. You could get through the first level without much difficulty, but it quickly ramped up. It changed perspectives. It went to the first person, like behind the shoulder view in the other levels. I know a lot of people didn't like that, but to me that was like innovative at the time. You go from a side-scrolling platform into the over-the-shoulder view. It was great, and there was nothing like shooting down those power-ups and getting that spread gun and just laying waste to everyone. Game number 2 is The Legend of Zelda. Now, at the time, when it first was released, I didn't actually play it that much, but I was fascinated with watching my friend's mother play, and she was obsessed with this game. She was obsessed with finding every heart, every item, clearing every dungeon. And I remember sitting back and watching it and just being amazed at how vast the map was. And you go from zone to zone to zone, and each area had its own personality, whether it was along the water shore or it was in the graveyard or up in the mountains. It just really felt cool, and your ability to explore, and you place bombs in places and you get a secret entrance maybe. It just opened up this world of possibilities to me as to what these kind of games could be. Having it so early on the Nintendo Entertainment System was really cool. It had enough difficulty to keep you. It had enough difficulty and then enough learning curve that it kept you right on the edge of being so frustrated you wanted to throw the cartridge. But yet the cartridge was gold, so you didn't want to mess it up, so you never actually threw it. And finally, game number 1, I don't think anybody's surprised by this, Super Mario Bros. 3. Super Mario Bros. 3 was one of the most anticipated games in my entire life, even till now. I remember seeing the Wizard. I remember seeing the Nintendo Power stuff. I remember seeing the game in other magazines and catalogs and stuff like that, and I just needed to have it. My birthday, though, is in July. So I had to wait, I think it came out in March or February, and I had to wait all the way till July. And I had a birthday, I remember specifically, I had a birthday party at my aunt's house, huge pool, tons of kids. It's mid-July, and we start opening gifts, and I get a gift the size of a cartridge, and I know what it is. I rip it open, I see this just bright yellow box, and I just could not wait to put that game in. It didn't matter if I had a pool in the backyard, it didn't matter if I had 15 more gifts. I was going to the Nintendo and I was playing Super Mario Bros. 3. It was so different than the other Mario Brothers so far because, you know, it gave you a little bit of choice. Like, once you got the warp whistle, you could go to my favorite level in Mario Brothers history, and that's World 4, where everything is giant size. The blocks are like 4 times the size of a regular block. The Goombas are huge, and it just the pipes were huge. It just really changed. It was something I'd never seen before, and I just absolutely loved it. So that's my top 10 NES games ever released. Like I said, not the top 10 games. These are my top 10 games. They all sit close to the heart, and I have fond memories and nostalgia of these games specifically. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Remember to leave a comment down below. Make sure you put your top 10 games so that I can compare and contrast. Maybe there was a few I missed. I'm sure there were a ton of fringe games that I, laid on the cutting room floor after this was done. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more content. Also, leave a comment below with your top 10 Nintendo games. Not the best, but your best top 10 games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Thanks a lot.